The tip show, a look at the round ahead, and who the winners will be from my perspective. First game of the round. Thursday night footy at GMHBA Stadium. Fucked it up the first time. Geelong versus Western Bulldogs in the Bailey Smith Cup. The recent encounters lean in the Western Bulldogs' favour, 2-1 in the last three matches. With the last game they played, which was at GMHBA Stadium, 95-48 in the Western Bulldogs' favour. The bookies have the Cats slight favourites though, which is interesting. I guess the home ground advantage does come into play. It is 5th versus 7th, so it's a pretty even matchup. Both teams are 6 and 4 for the year. All that being said, I know Tom Stewart's back in the side. There's a few ins and outs, but I'm going to have to go with Western Bulldogs to win by 12 points, in my opinion, in pretty scrappy, close affair. But I think the Western Bulldogs, they're humming at the moment, and they should be able to get the win. I'd have to go the margin in anywhere between 8 to 34 points in the Western Bulldogs' favour. Now let's move into Friday night footy. Dreamtime at the G. Essendon versus Richmond. What's going to be a little bit of an interesting encounter. Both teams are a little out of form. Well, they're both in similar positions on the ladder. Then again, Essendon's quality should win out. Over the last three encounters, Essendon do hold a slight advantage, 2-1. Then again, Richmond's last victory was in 2022, which is when the side was a little bit more competitive for the rebuild, so I guess you can't take that all in account. The last encounter went Essendon's way, 86-74 at Dreamtime of the G in 2024, so a 12-point win Essendon's way. Essendon's the heavy favourites in the bookies' eyes, which I agree with. Well, when you got 10th versus 16th, the 10th team should win most times out of 10. Essendon being 5 and 4 and Richmond 3 and 7, they're two ahead in the ledger. So, all that being said, I'm going to say Essendon to win by 30 points. Yeah, I think there'll be a bit of a margin between them, even though Essendon just coming up a big flogging by the Western Bulldogs. I think they'll bounce back. And I'll predict them to win by 30 points. I'm going to go the margin line between 24 to 48 points. I don't think they'll kick away that much. Like, they'll keep it within 48 points, Richmond. So, okay, now let's talk about Saturday's games. 4 of them to get through. Starting off with Carlton versus GWS at Marvel Stadium. Double check it's a Marvel. Yeah, I thought it was a Marvel. It's only one game MCG on the Saturday, so yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, so Carlton beat GWS. Kind of an even ledger. Carlton has the wood over them in the last three encounters, 2-1. With the last encounter being quite a convincing win to Carlton, 124-66. The old 58-point margin. A bit of a shellacking. Carlton are slight favourites in the bookies' mind, and I'd have kind of humming and hawing with this game. I think it's going to be quite a close run affair. With GWS being 5 and 5 and Carlton being 4 and 6, not much between them. 11th versus 8th. Carlton being 11th, GWS being 8th. So there's only a game out between them, so it should be quite close. But in saying that, I'm going to have to go with GWS to win by 8 points. And the margin of victory could be between 2 to 20. Either way, actually. Carlton could win by 20. GWS could win by 20. Carlton could win by 2. GWS could win by 2. This is kind of a very 50-50 match, and I'm going to have to go with GWS to win by 8 points. Just think they have a bit more depth in their overall team, not just the top 6. And then on to Saturday's second game, this one being at the MCG, Hawthorn versus Brisbane, in which should be an entertaining, quite a thrilling affair. Hawthorn do have the wood over Brisbane in the last 3 encounters, 3-0 actually, so that's something to look at. With the last one being Hawthorn victory by 25 points, 100-75. The bookies do have the Hawks to be the marginal favourite, so there's not much in between it in terms of the betting aspect. 4th versus 2nd. Hawks are 7 and 3. Brisbane are 7-2-1. So The draw is the only thing separating them on the ladder. So yeah, it can't be much to split them, but I'm going to have to go with the Hawks on this one as much as it pains me. Kind of a closet Brisbane Lion fan and a second favourite team after the West Coast Eagles, you know. The early 2000s got me to enjoy Brisbane, and they're not a Victorian team, so they do get a slight advantage in terms of supporter base from me. The bias doesn't make me want to tip the Lions, but thinking logically, I'm going to have to go with the Hawks to win by 20 points, and the margin could be that 20 points to 40 points, like, yeah, Hawthorn could get a run on and put him to bed, but saying that, yeah, I think the Hawks going to win by 20 points. Then I have the note page. Saturday's third game will be North Melbourne versus Collingwood at Marvel Stadium, so you North fans have a little bit of hope, being that is at Marvel instead of the MCG. At the MCG you'd get floored by 100 points, but Marvel does give you a bit more of an edge. Collingwood are 3-0 in the last three encounters, so as you'd expect with North Melbourne being where they're at and Collingwood where they're at. Collingwood are quite heavy favourites in the bookies' eyes, which makes sense, being the top of the ladder, and North Melbourne is 17th, so first versus 17th kind of goes that way. The last encounter is very interesting though. North Melbourne did have a strong lead for most of the game, ending up losing only by 1 point, 119 to 118 at Marvel Stadium, so it does lend North Melbourne a little bit of hope. Collingwood being 8-2 for the season, and North Melbourne 2 wins, 7 losses and 1 draw. As much as I'd love to tip North Melbourne, as I do not enjoy the Collingwood football team that much, yeah, historically and currently, I mean, you have to respect the way they play. They do play a good brand of footy, and they're racking up the wins, as much as I hate seeing them on top of the ladder. I will have to tip Collingwood though, unfortunately, by 28 points. Just like logically the way they're going at the moment, they should get the dub, and 28 points seems like a fair margin at Marvel. If it was at the MCG, I'd probably pick a wider margin, but come on, you Kangas, hopefully you run an upset, or hopefully you put in an upset. I'll be happy to be wrong on this one. On to the last game of Saturday. Sorry, getting a bit caught up in my throat here. Thinking about Collingwood being top of the ladder just brings me to tears. The last game of Saturday will be Fremantle versus Port Adelaide at Optus Stadium in Perth. So that's going to be an interesting little encounter there. Port Adelaide do have a pretty good record against Fremantle at the minute, 3-0 in their last 3 encounters, including the game of the match in the last round of the last year to knock Fremantle out of the finals. So they got up 67-87 then by 20 points. Fremantle are heavy favourites in bookies' eyes, which is understandable, being where Port have played this year, and it being at Optus Stadium, Fremantle do get a bit of a buff. Fremantle just outside the 8th and 9th, and Port Adelaide are languishing near the bottom at 15th. They really need a win to keep their season alive. Even though they are 4-6 and 5-5, there's not much splitting them in that respect in games won. But if the Fremantle do get the dub, Port Adelaide will be quite far behind the rest of the 8. In saying this, my West Coast Eagles bias comes in. Maybe. I don't know, Port Adelaide have just had a good record of Fremantle recently, even at Optus Stadium. I'm just like thinking Port won't actually get the win by 10 points in my eyes. I might just be smoking the meth pipe, but it's the way I see it. Could go either way. It's like the same as the Carlton and GWS game. It's kind of a 50-50 in my eyes. Could be Fremantle winning by 10-30, Port Adelaide winning by 10-20. I think it's a bit more tight on that end, but yeah. Now let's look at the last 3 matches around Sunday's affairs. We're going to kick it off in Adelaide for Adelaide versus West Coast, a game that I'm kind of dreading to watch. I do watch all the West Coast games, even though they have been painful. We got a win last week, but it's been a painful 4 years for me. But yeah, and a trip to Adelaide is very scary because last couple of times we fronted up to Adelaide has been quite a nasty affair on our account. Adelaide do have the 3-0 record over us over the last 3 encounters, so that makes a lot of sense the way West Coast is travelling at the moment. They don't win against many teams. Adelaide are massive favourites in the bookies' eyes, which is fair because West Coast don't have much of a hope to win. And the last encounter was Adelaide 137 to West Coast 38, a 99-point flogging. So I'm expecting a bit of improvement from last year's result, and maybe we might keep it somewhat respectable. Or being 6th versus 18th on the ladder, you know, keep it as respectable as we can. With West Coast being 1-9, that's not a very good look. And then Adelaide 6-4, they really want to kind of keep in touch with the 4, so they're going to want to put the foot on the neck, so to speak, and get as big as win as possible. Looking at everything, I'm going to have to go Adelaide to win by 62 points. Yeah, I think we can keep it better than last year and keep it somewhat respectable. Yeah, just a 10-goal loss instead of like a 15-plus goal loss, you know? 16 plus actually. Wait, math. 16 plus goal loss last time. Yeah, let's keep it to 10 goals, please, West Coast. Please keep my Sunday relatively happy. I can accept a 60-point loss against Adelaide's high-power forward line. They do kick a lot of big scores, and yeah, I'm hoping we can keep within 60. Flip the notebook back over to look at the Melbourne versus Sydney game, which I could think would be which in my eyes could be one of the games of the round. Pretty even affair. Melbourne are 2-1 over the last 3, so slight edge to Melbourne in the recent encounters. The last encounter, actually, Sydney did win 86-64, so a bit of a spread in Sydney's favour. Swans are slight favourites in the bookies' eyes, which I do understand them being it is at the MCG, but Swans are kind of been a bit more consistent this year, even though both teams are 4 and 6 and 14th and 12th respectively, Melbourne being 14th. They've been in a bit better form of recently. Melbourne, their forward line starting to function, which was the biggest hole in their game. That being said, I don't know, I don't really trust Sydney the way they're travelling this year. They've had better results of late. Their team's performing a little bit better, but I'm going to have to pick Melbourne or Nam to win by 27 points. Two teams that I would hope would be higher up the ladder because I don't mind either of the teams. One of the Melbourne supported by my brother, so I've kind of, their woes over the late 2000s and 2010s. For most of the 2010s, I've kind of get a bit of sympathy for them, and yeah, you kind of grown a bit of attachment to them. And them seeing them win the 2021 grand final in Perth was a big. I do enjoy their players as well, so got a bit of a soft spot for Melbourne. Sydney just the early 2000s, rival with West Coast. Had a lot of respect for them. Melbourne to win by 27 in my eyes. Let's crack on to the last game of the round. An interesting account, I guess. St Kilda looking to bounce back after a disappointing loss to the West Coast Eagles last week to play the Gold Coast Suns at Marvel Stadium, I believe. Yeah, it would be at Marvel Stadiums, which is a place Gold Coast Suns don't like to go. Their last trip there, they lost to the Richmond Tigers in a very upsetting manner. So we'll see if they can bounce back at Marvel, perform a little bit better. Gold Coast are slight favourites in the bookies' eyes, which is understandable, being that they are a lot further in their development and their play style this year than St Kilda. Yeah, 3rd versus 13th, you have to kind of lean to Gold Coast in your eyes. Gold Coast being 7-2, they haven't played their full 10 games yet. St Kilda 4 and 6, they're a bit of a iffy team. St Kilda do have the wood over them. in the last couple of encounters though, but Gold Coast have been a bit of an up and down team for their whole entire existence. Yeah, 2-1 St Kilda's way of the last three, and St Kilda won a narrow one last year, 51-48. You know, I just got a sneaky feeling that Marvel Stadium might be the difference here, and St Kilda could win by 15 points. I don't know, just a smaller, narrow, enclosed ground might be difficult for Gold Coast to get that game up and running. They don't win too many in Melbourne, especially at Marvel. So I'm going to have to lean slightly to St Kilda to win by 15 points. And that's my thoughts on the round 11 and who's going to win. We'll see how right I am next week. I'll have a little rundown over it and see how many I got right. And feel free to let me know what your tips are for the round and where I've gotten it wrong and where you've gotten it right. Just enjoy the footy, and hopefully we don't get too many controversies out of this week. Come on, West Coast, get the upset. Nah, it's not going to happen. Bye, guys.